Well, hello and welcome to the Good Stories Podcast. I'm Jody, here again with Stephen, and we wanted to take a minute before getting started today to say thank you to anyone who's been listening. We've only been doing this about a week now, and it's already been such a gift to us to hear good things back from you. We're never quite sure what you all will find most interesting, so we've been picking the things that we love the most, and I really do hope it's evident that we love these stories. You will find that we are light on social media. Steven, do you even have a Facebook account?
I do not. My wife set me up one like 15 years ago, and I've never signed into it.
Right, yeah. Social media has never been a big important thing to us, but with a podcast, that's the sandbox you're in, so we'll try to build that up. But really, we're just so pleased to include you in these conversations, and I hope they always make your day better. Today, we're shifting things a bit, as we're not going through a single story this time. Instead, we're going to talk about the legend of King Arthur. And it's a big, expansive world, started a long time ago, old world, and it has changed shape over time, and it's going to continue to change. But how cool is it that we all still know his name more than 1,000 years after his time? There's definitely something special about Arthur. But as we go through this, I'm calling it an Arthur sampler today, and hopefully you do learn more about him. There will be a lot of different books and stories mentioned. We're still new enough to podcasting that I've not been adding show notes, but if there are any specific books or titles you'd like to know the name or details about, please just reach out to us. You can use the Good Stories Podcast Facebook page or our website, goodstoriespodcast.net, and I'm happy to send you book details so you can find them for your own reading. So now, time for a story. Over to you, brother.
Once upon a time, the once civilized and Christian land of Britain was laid waste. Abandoned by Rome, marauders and thieves pillaged the land, and wild beasts and forests reclaimed once fertile lands. Petty kings and scattered knights tried to establish some order, but this was beyond their abilities. At this time, God sent Arthur. The son of Uther Pendragon, he established his right to rule by drawing a magic sword from a stone. He establishes his rule and brings peace to the land. He draws to him great knights, noble ladies, and wise men. His knights dare and accomplish many quests, earning great honor and renown. This is the golden age of Britain. Eventually, through betrayal, the fellowship of the Round Table is broken, and civil war comes to the land. In an epic battle, Arthur defeats his nephew Modred, but is himself mortally wounded. He is conducted by a fairy woman to the Isle of Avalon, where he is to receive healing. Someday, he will come again to rule once more. It is said when he is most needed.
That's a pretty cool story. I mean, just those pieces of it.
Yeah, the incredible thing about Arthur is how broad it is, how many stories it is, and how mythic it is. How do you tell the story of Arthur in one podcast? Well, the answer is you don't. There's no way that we possibly can, but hopefully we can give you a taste of it, and this will lead to many, many more conversations in the future.
That's what I mean. It's a sampler. Mm-hmm. Exactly. I kind of broke it out between consistencies and discrepancies, for lack of a better word. So there are things consistent about, fairly consistent about stories of Arthur. And do you know more about just the history of it?
Yes, I do.
I figured you did, because I did not write that down, but that seemed up your alley.
So let's start with the name, Arthur. Where does that come from, and what's the meaning of it? And like many things, we don't really know, but there's debate and discussion on it. So a lot of the stuff you'll see thinks that it comes from the art part of it, the art, which means bear. And so the idea of Arturius, Artur, the idea of a bear man or a strong man. Some people take the Arthur part of it and say that it's based on the name of Thor. There's also references to eagles. There's lots and lots of ideas of what it could mean, but you'll hear all these terms. You'll hear him talked about the strong man of Britain. That was one of the options. Yeah.
Oh, I know. I looked at dozens and dozens of stories, and a lot of them aren't even in English, as you'd expect. Mm-hmm. So Wales and Scotland and Ireland as well, the whole Isle of the Mighty. The Arturius one sounds Roman.
Agreed. So I don't think you can actually talk about Arthur or have an understanding of what we think might be the historical Arthur without talking about Rome and Rome's relationship to Britain. Is that a story that you're familiar with at all?
I mean, no. I did long ago watch the Great Courses. Can we plug the Great Courses? They're not paying us. We're just big fans. The Great Courses is an app now. It wasn't always an app.
No, it used to be a catalog. So where
Yeah.
you would basically have to order these essentially college courses put on discs. They were really expensive back in the day, but now they have come out with the great courses online.
And it's great. For a while, they made a questionable decision to call it Wondrium.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
Fortunately, they've moved past that, and they're back to the great courses. But I did watch the lady whose name you know, but I don't. And
Dorsey Armstrong.
Yeah,
she is
was
fantastic.
Great. I cannot just pick it out of my memory, though. So tell us about Rome.
So Britain has been populated for forever, basically. There have been people in Britain for as long as we can find. But Rome first had its encounter with it in the 1st century BC under Julius Caesar. Yes, that Julius Caesar. As he was conquering right, left, and center, he decided he was going to cross the English Channel and invade Britain. He did it twice. The first time, not so successfully. The second time, he went back and was slightly more successful, enough so that he could claim it as a victory, but he left. There really was no Roman footprint there in that point. However, Rome always had eyes on Britain, and so in the years 43 to 47, the Emperor Claudius basically invaded, and from that time on, Rome had a foothold in Britain. Rome never conquered the whole thing.
Just for resources, or just because Rome
resources
wasn't
and Rome loved to conquer.
Yeah, okay.
It just loved to expand and conquer and do great things. But Britain was known for a lot of resources, particularly things like tin. So it was very, very important to the metallurgy of the time, and so Britain was important to the time.
Yeah, so I want to point out that there are pieces of historical Arthur, the man who might have been Arthur, and then there's the legend and the story of Arthur, and they kind of blend together, and there's gray area. So this is historical stuff that happened, but we're also going to go into legend stuff. So let's stipulate this is history, actual factual.
As far as I know, yes.
As far as we know, yes.
The other thing about it, though, is the historical is going to bleed into the legend, and we're going to see some of the roots of the legend. So Rome never conquered all of Britain. Basically, what you had was a very Roman kind of southern and eastern Britain. To the north, they had the Picts, right? Those are the guys that painted themselves blue and were really intense, and they built a wall.
I heard something about hair lit on fire.
Absolutely, they were wild.
Wow.
So Hadrian's Wall was really the marker there in the north that basically was the boundary between the Roman world and the Pictish world. You then had, confusingly, the Scots, who were in Ireland at the time, and Rome never touched Ireland. They never conquered it, never set foot there. But there was a lot of interchange between the Celtic Scots in Ireland and the island of the mighty, that is Britain. You then had the early Briton people who were never fully conquered. And in some places in the West, what would now be called Wales, they kept their culture alive for a long time. So
is that the Breton, Breton? Is that what you mean? Breton?
Yep. So you essentially have a Roman world for a while, but then you have these other cultures surrounding and engaging with it. It's important to understand, I think, if you're going to understand Arthur, either legendarily or historically, how Roman they were. I mean, the legions were there, the cities were there, the baths were there. And then once Constantine converted to Christianity, Christianity was there. So England was a very, very early center of Christendom under Roman rule. Well, Rome, especially in the West, kind of fell apart. And a date to have tucked in the back of your head is 410 AD. So early in the 5th century, this was where Rome is thought to have left Britain. Essentially, as the barbaric hordes were coming in and sacking and invading Rome, Rome recalled the legions. They loved their empire, but they loved Italy more. And so if they had to decide what they were going to protect, they protected Rome, the city. And so what that means is, at that time, the legions left, and all of a sudden, this civilized Roman Christian world was on its own. I mean, can you imagine that?
It would pull the infrastructure.
Absolutely. And we're talking, 500 years here, or at least 400 from the 1st century to the 5th century. This was Roman. America hasn't even lasted that long.
Yeah.
And so if we identify ourselves here as Americans, can you imagine what it would have been to have been Roman for a half a millennium, and then all of a sudden it's gone?
Yeah.
And not only is it gone, but there's very violent, very mean people coming to kind of fight and attack you. All of a sudden, you have Saxons, you have Angles, you have basically everyone that we would consider to be Vikings coming in and just taking what they can take.
I believe they're referred to as warring factions.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And so what do you do? What do you do in that setting? Well, this is where basically Western chivalry has its roots. You have people that then gather together to defend themselves. You have people that are gathered together to defend what they've grown, what they've kept, what they've earned. There are small pockets of learning that are still there and present, but that is not the priority. The priority is not dying. Part of that is defense. Part of that is maybe before the community next door comes to take our stuff, we should take their stuff first. And so all of a sudden you have the warring factions, not only from outside the island, but within the island. And it becomes really, really intense. There's a classic quote from a guy called the Venerable Bede. The Venerable Bede was a historian who really gives us a deep insight into this time, into the Dark Ages.
Or his title?
Bede was his name. Venerable is just what we think of him as.
His nomer. Okay.
That's right. He is the Venerable Bede.
That's excellent.
And so there was a letter sent in 423 that he quotes. So this was sent to the Roman world to try and beg for help. And here's what it said. It said, "The barbarians drive us to the sea. The sea drives us back to the barbarians. Between them, we are exposed to two sorts of death. We are either slaughtered or drowned." And this was the world when Rome left. So enter who we think is the historical Arthur. When you look at the archaeological evidence, what you see is this expansion of the Saxons across the country. But all of a sudden, it kind of stops right around in the middle of the country. Something drove them back. Something stopped them from conquering the whole island at that time. And we think, we hope, I hope, that something was a guy named Arthur.
So that's a little bit of the historical piece. The other component to that is the written works. I don't know. What do you think on history versus legend with some of the older things?
They're as historical as we get if you're looking at the ancient world.
Sure.
I mean, some of these stuff is as good as we've got for other historical personages. Other of it is less good. And this is where the debates can come in about whether Arthur really existed or not.
Was he real? I saw that question a bunch. He represented something people needed, whether or not it was one man or a couple different their stories blended together. But
well, I think I like to think of it like a tree. I think there are roots. I think there are roots in a historical man who might have been called Arthur, or he might have been called something else, but who we think of as Arthur, I think was rooted in a historical personage.
Yeah.
But then the tree just grew and then it took off. And there is so much legend now wrapped around it that it's very hard to pick apart where are the roots of this. But the legend is so cool that a lot of us don't really care. One of the fun parts about Arthur studies is that the farther back you get, the more you can feel like you kind of know all there is to know about it. The further you get in the history, all of a sudden there's thousands of new books and stories and articles and stuff. But back in the day, there wasn't much. So probably the oldest one we have is a writer named Gildas. Gildas wrote in Latin right around 500 AD. And he does not mention Arthur. The name Arthur does not show up in his writings, but he does mention something called the Battle of Baden Hill. The Battle of Baden Hill is commonly associated with Arthur, and in other manuscripts here, we'll talk a little bit about that. The name he gives is somebody called Ambrosius Aurelianus. And so if Arturius is Latin, boy, it's hard to get more Latin than Ambrosius
That's pretty
Aurelianus.
supreme, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's described basically as kind of a Romano-Celtic war leader, right? So a guy who is Roman trained, Roman educated, but is full-on Briton and who is defending against the Saxons. And so there is lots of discussion, especially with the reference to Baden Hill, that maybe this Ambrosius Aurelianus could be Arthur. Some think he is, some don't. And then there's some other characters around that time as well.
Does that line up with the Saxon line in the middle of the country?
A little bit, yes. The first time Arthur's name actually shows up is a poet named Aneurin. Aneurin was writing in a Proto-Welsh language The material we think is dated anywhere between the 6th to 11th centuries, depending who you talk to about it. But what he was writing was this series of elegies for warriors who had fallen in battle. This is not a story. This is not a narrative poem. This is basically a list of these different warriors.
Yeah, by name.
Absolutely. And one of these is to a warrior named Gwarther. Now, we've talked about my pronunciation. I can't speak English correctly, so good luck when it comes to Welsh.
Full apologies from both of us. I got to go to Wales this past fall, and we tried to make any sense of the language. It's a super cool language, but even now, we have a Welsh alphabet on a little card and tried to sound out street sign. Couldn't do it. And that's all on me, all on you. Apologies. We're not doing it on purpose. So sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
It's going to get worse when we get to the French. I'm just sorry, but I'll do my best. So anyways, in this poem in stanza 99, the poet praises one of the Arthurs, and he says, quote, "He fed black ravens on the ramparts of battle. Though he was no Arthur, among the powerful ones in battle, in the front rank, Gwarther was a palisade." So it sounds like a pretty cool guy, pretty tough.
Palisade.
A palisade.
Wow.
But he was no Arthur.
He was no Arthur. I loved actually the aside of it, where it's such common knowledge that you can be like, well, he was no Arthur, right? Maybe awesome guy, but no Arthur. It reminded me of the Pern books. And there was something so well known there and such common knowledge that nobody thought to write it down, right? How to defeat the thread in the story. The knowledge of how to defeat the thread was something everybody knew. It was so just common knowledge that over time it became unwritten and unspoken because it was so taken for granted. And then over time, people forgot it. And so I do think there's a bunch about Arthur that's been forgotten over time. That's why there's holes in the stories. Even when you look at the breadth of the stories out there, the oral stories about him too, there are holes in the story. And I think a lot of it is because of that reason, because it was so well known. He was no Arthur.
I think that's 100% true. That totally makes sense to me. Arthur, well, he just keeps showing up. He keeps popping up from time to time. So the next one, the kind of the story we get is from the Historia Bretonum. So this is a Latin text. This is from a guy named Nennius, which I think is a delightful name. Nennius. This one, we have manuscripts from the 11th century. We think the material is dated to around the 9th century. And this is where Arthur is first described as a military leader. Interestingly enough, never a king. He is never described as a king. The Latin that gets used for him here is dux bellorum, which is basically a leader of war, or a war leader, or a war chief.
Okay.
The other title that gets used is a miles, where miles is just the Latin word for soldier or fighter.
It's like melee.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah. So militia, right, comes from miles, right? A collection of fighters, a collection of soldiers. So in this work, this describes in some detail the battles between Arthur and the Saxons. Specifically, 12 major battles are highlighted and sites, locations given, and archaeologists have spent careers trying to find where those sites are. But the 12th of these, referencing back to Gildas, is the Battle of Mount Baden. And so this is the connection between that first author we described and Arthur in the Nennius story. This is also where we first start seeing Arthur as a Christian leader in the texts. Because remember, Rome was Christian, Britain was Christian, it was Roman Christian. And so we have described here as Arthur, through the power of our Lord Jesus Christ and through the power of the Blessed Virgin Mary, his mother, there was a great slaughter among them at the battle. So this was a Christian warrior, right? And so this is what we see. It's not terribly surprising that this would come up and be strong in the 11th century, because what other major historical event is going on around this time?
I feel like you give me pop quiz questions. Just tell me.
The Crusades. So this is the crusading period, and where Arthur really exploded onto the literary scene is the crusading area. Now remember, this is 500 years after whoever might have been Arthur is dead. And so this is really where the legends start to blossom and start to grow. I'll just do a quick list here. So in terms of ancient texts, really the only other one I'm going to name is something called the Annals Cambriae. So the Annals Cambriae are Welsh chronicles. This is actually a complex of Latin chronicles. It's more than one. It's a bunch of different ones. There's 4 main manuscripts we have on this, an A, B, C, and D, and they don't all agree. But in the A manuscript, it does list for the year 72 of the Chronicle, which corresponds to year 516 AD, the Battle of Badon, in which Arthur carried the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. So again, we have him associated with the Battle of Badon Hill, and we have him associated as a Christian warrior. In that same A manuscript, we have with the year 93 of the Chronicle, which correlates to around 537 AD, the strike of Camlin, in which Arthur and Medrawt fell, and there was death in Britain and Ireland. So here we finally see the first mention of the ending of Arthur's reign and rule. And Medrawt is, of course, Mordred. So, which is pretty exciting. Near as I can tell, and again, I'm not a scholar on this stuff, I'm just an enthusiast. Near as I can tell, this kind of wraps up what we have ancient world-wise. From here on out, we have more of what I would consider to be fairly legitimate literature and lots more text. Any other questions or thoughts kind of on the ancient writings, the older texts on this?
I've always just been so surprised how little is recorded. So there's like the reference, though he was no Arthur, and the name on the gravestone, and those small aside things. But if you look back at actual texts that support this man who we still talk about so much later, it's really very little known about his start, the beginnings of Arthur. You know, he's definitely a thing because it's grown over time, but the foundation is a little patchwork.
Yes, it is. So, for again, a half a millennia. I mean, the number of years here blows my mind, how long this has gone before we get to the next one that I'm going to mention. So this next one is where things just explode. This was a bestseller in its day and has been ever since. Of course, I am referring to The History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth. This, again, was in Latin. We think it was completed somewhere around the year 1138, and this was really kind of a first true full telling is the wrong way to word it, because none of these are a full telling, but this was the first story with a beginning and a middle and an end. And so many of the things that we think about Arthur, this is where they first came into print.
Yeah, a pseudo-historical account of Britain's kings, and it introduces Arthur really into the medieval literature.
Now, that term itself, pseudo-historical, lends itself to question on this. So do you know why we would consider this one pseudo-historical, or why there'd be debate on the topic?
I just thought he took artistic liberties that were known at the time. Is that not it?
Many people believe that, but we honestly don't know. So this work, when you read through the introduction, he talks about, so he was in Oxford at the time, and he says that somebody there gave him a little book written in the British language, and that is his authority for this entire story he tells. And if you crack this book open, the one that Geoffrey wrote, one of the things you'll notice is that Arthur is only a part of it. He is not at the beginning, and he is not at the end. He's a big chunk of it, but he's a chunk in the middle. This really is a history of the kings of Britain that goes all the way back to Brutus back in the day, which is where they say the name Britain comes from. It includes things like Joseph of Arimathea and all sorts of tales going back a long ways. If you read chronicles, they tend to do this. Recently, I read through the primary Russian chronicle, and again, it starts with like the flood.
What? Why did you do that?
Oh, there are stories in that one. Someday we may come up to it. But these all tend to do that, where they start in history, often biblical history if it's a Christian nation, and then work their way to the forward. In the modern world, we have this sense that new is good, that discovery is good. We compliment people for innovation, for creativity, for coming up with a story. I mean, Tolkien, coming up with the Lord of the Rings in this world. But in the ancient and medieval world, that not have been considered necessarily a positive thing. They would much prefer it to be something that is built from the past, or the authority of the past. And so just about all writers in the classical and the medieval world are always referencing old books. They're referencing sources. The problem is sometimes those sources are real, and sometimes they're just making them up.
Yeah, I'm going to push on you a little bit with that. So how do you know the preference was that, or is that just the custom of authors at the time? Is there Is that something you've read somewhere, that the preference of peoples was to look backward and have that foundation?
It is in the entire flavor of all the texts.
Mm.
So the more of them you read, you just see it there. This idea of an authority, of something from the past in it. It is throughout it. And
That is a
so
change.
this is
Interesting.
part of the difference between what we would consider to be the classical world and what we would consider the romantic world.
Sure.
So this is part of the move to modernity. When you read through the Iliad, you read through the Odyssey, what do you have? You have people telling the stories of their fathers and forefathers. You have this steady decline where the great was in the past and that no one today can match up to it. So you have Nestor at the siege of Troy talking about, the heroics of the past. You have Odysseus that when he comes out on his journey home is just destroying everybody under him. There's always this sense in, again, antiquity and the classical world
we've
of this
peaked.
decay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That everything was better before and that men are just not the same as they were.
I mean, Tolkien does that. He uses of old many times in the trilogy, for sure. So he adopts some of that pattern, I'd say.
Yeah. There's this switch that happens. I think I can pick it up somewhere in the Renaissance, but certainly in the early modern period. And once you get into the modern period, all of a sudden the old is antique, right? There's this chronological snobbery we have that the old stuff is obviously worse. We're clearly better now.
Yeah, let's go with antiquated.
Antiquated,
There you
love
go.
it. And so, so that's a difference. So with Joffrey, obviously historians have searched for forever to try and find this book, to try and say, is this really a book? And there's a spectrum of opinion on this. There are those that think that the book existed, we just don't have it. And so we just keep hoping we can find it. There are others that say, nope, he made it all up. The whole thing he made up. And then there are others that fall somewhere in the middle that say he probably did have a source of some kind or multiple sources that he was pulling together, but some of it is definitely out of his own head. So we just don't know.
I have a couple written texts that I found reference to. One is called Wace's Roman de Brute.
It's usually pronounced Was. So this was done
Was.
after Joffrey. In the 100 to 200 years after Joffrey of Monmouth, a ton of these got built out. And this one was very important. It was the first full story in a vernacular language. So whereas Joffrey of Monmouth was in Latin, this one was done in Old Northern French. And this one borrows a lot from Joffrey, but the one thing that it has that's new
That's why I wrote it down.
is the
First known mention of the Round Table.
The round table. I love it. And the table that we are sitting at currently is round.
It's true. And I've named her Lona. It's from a George MacDonald book. We'll talk about that at a different time. But.
The round table, that is Lona. I love it. So that was Was. There's a close contemporary of him who wrote in English for the first. And this one, there's just no way to pronounce this right. I have heard some graduate students say you can tell like who somebody studied under by how they pronounce it. So I pronounce it Leamon because that's easy. But the little symbol in the middle is actually an Old English symbol. And so I've also heard it pronounced Lachman and various other formulations. But we're going to go with Leamon.
A little Arabic. I don't think that was it. So.
Well, it definitely wasn't it. That's true. So, but this Was and Leamon definitely were the first to enter into kind of, again, vernacular speech. And then Was, the round table, and then Leamon is where you start to get some of the concepts, at least the first that I could find, about the return of Arthur. The idea of Arthur coming back someday.
And when do they think that one was printed?
Within 100 years or so after Joffrey of Monmouth.
Okay. So all in the same. A lot happens in a couple hundred years. So I shouldn't generalize like that, but in the same sort of neighborhood.
When we're comparing it against Gildas, they're basically contemporaries.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Neighbors. Do you have any other texts you want to talk about?
I do. And again, what I'm describing here is the tree. I'm describing the flowering of the Arthurian legend. And we're well out of the historical age right here. And now we're moving into just legend and story, but they are wonderful. Remember, when Arthur, whoever the original man was, assuming he existed, was around, warfare was very different. We are now in the high Middle Ages. We are now talking horses and chargers, knights with plate armor and lances and heavy cavalry and just all that we think about when we think about the high medieval era.
Just so you understand, I remember Stephen having a Lego set as a child, and it had the little fake horsey Lego. They were horse-shaped Legos, and that whole castle and the battlements and the turrets. It was probably very small, but in my memory, it looked really big, and you were a little obsessed. So
I still have the horses.
no, you don't.
I do indeed. With their accoutrements, they have the
Yeah, they have their emblems or whatever they're called on the side. Yeah,
There was a red and a blue one.
sure.
Yeah. So the next one I want to talk about is actually a French Arthur called Chrétien de Troyes. Again, I told you it was going to be bad. I apologize. Arthur is a British king. He's an English king. But so much of the Arthurian legend actually comes from French. Chrétien de Troyes is the one who gave us Lancelot. He gave us the relationship between Lancelot and Guinevere, Arthur's wife. He gave us the Grail, and this is really where we see courtly love and chivalry coming into its own. You get a little bit of that in Geoffrey of Monmouth, so you see the seeds of it there, but it really comes to full flower in Chrétien. For Arthurian romances, probably the most important one is the Knight of the Cart. So the Knight of the Cart is the story where Lancelot, basically Guinevere is captured, as she often is. Lancelot is chasing after her. He rides 2 horses to death, and then he comes across a dwarf with a cart, and he gets offered a ride. The thing about it, though, is at the time, riding in a cart was something that only prisoners and slaves did. So to enter into the cart in this way was a dishonorable thing. It says he hesitated for 2 steps before getting into the cart because his love for his lady was great enough to overcome it. Of course, at the end, when he meets up with his lady, she's mad at him that he hesitated at all, and it becomes a big fight. But this is probably the most, I'd say maybe the most important of the 4 he does. The other big one is actually unfinished, and that's the Grail story. This is where we start to see the Grail come into play, and he doesn't finish it, so there's no ending to it. And then that gets taken up down the road by other writers and other artists.
Yeah. I have one called the Book of, I don't know how to say it, Taliesin, which is Welsh, and I have it in the 14th century. And I've read things where Taliesin, how do you say it?
Taliesin.
Taliesin.
But I'm probably wrong.
But again, is a mashup with Merlin, or they're connected. Let's go with they're connected. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Okay. You looked at me skeptically.
No, I'm just thinking through it a little bit because what we're talking about now, remember back when we were talking about the historical roots of this, we talked about the fact that there were the Picts to the north and then the Scots in Ireland and then essentially the Welsh, the Britons basically in the west. What these Celtic peoples have in common is a Druidic culture and faith. And so Taliesin is well known in Welsh myth as one of the great druids of their history. Merlin is usually put after him. Not after him in terms of power, authority, impressiveness,
like
but
descendant?
in time. Yeah, or maybe even a student or a pupil. Taliesin is not normally considered the teacher of Merlin, but they're kind of thought of in that same great tradition of Celtic druids and bards.
So I had him in here just as a related to Arthur thing. And because I picked out stories that made me think of current literature, a story that supports something that has developed in modern time. And so this was a poetic anthology. So Taliesin, I think, was a court bard. That was his position, and a poet. So these are poems in Welsh. The Battle of the Trees, I think, is the main one. Have you heard it?
I don't know that one.
I won't read the whole thing. So he describes himself, I am Taliesin, the servant of the chief, the bard of a noble king. In the land of the living I was born, but in the land of the dead I was made. In the forest I was formed, the mighty battle of the trees I witnessed. So the birches and the alders followed, their leaves sharp as swords, and the yews and the willows with their ancient roots joined the fray. And so at last the battle was won. I'm skipping to the end. The trees of the forest triumphant, but the price was high. Many trees lay fallen in the soil, and the battle cries of the warriors were lost. But the battle of the trees remains in the hearts of those who hear it still. Does it sound familiar to you?
No, I've never heard that one.
Well, no, I mean in something current. I went to Two Towers.
Oh, the Battle of the Tree. Oh, yeah.
The horns and the Ents.
Absolutely.
And there was a cost to the Ents. And I saw you had a book. It said that was by Tolkien, I think, about Arthur. And I've not read that. And so I don't know how many of these he references in his own work and subject matter, but there's so many. And that Battle of the Trees really, really stuck out to me. It is the Two Towers. It's so cool. Isengard and Helm's Deep, if you want to know. So.
That is wonderful. No, I haven't heard that one before, but I can clearly see the through line on that one. With Arthur, Well, tell you what, let me just wrap this up with two more, and then I'll be done with my tree of kind of sources. So the two other ones that I would like to mention are a guy named Thomas Mallory. Thomas Mallory wrote a book called Le Morte d'Arthur, which, again, I apologize for the
Not
French.
bad. That's better than me. I struggle with that one.
But he didn't write it in French. He's English.
Yeah.
So this was actually one of the very first books ever printed in English. So after the Bible, this was like one of the very first ones. And it is massive. He pulled together so much that had been done across the continent and in England, and he wrote this great work, Le Morte d'Arthur. And so if you're looking for what in many ways is kind of the definitive Arthur story, when people think about what is the definitive story, it's hard to argue against this one. And so really important, you should know about it. And then the other one I'm going to mention, and then I forgot one that I'm going to go back to. The other one I'm going to mention, though, is just my personal favorite. And that's a more modern work. That's Alfred Lord Tennyson's Idylls of the King.
Absolutely.
Which is my
Absolutely.
favorite.
I said it.
It's my favorite telling of the Arthur myth. Now, having said that, I do want to go back to Taliesin because this reminds me of the Welsh tradition. We haven't really talked much yet about the Welsh tradition. And so there is a collection of stories that's been translated into a work called the Mabinogion. The Mabinogion has a number of stories about the Welsh world, which are mystical and beautiful and full of fairyland and just incredible, but there's also several Arthurian romances embedded within it. And so the Mabinogion, add it to your bookcases, is wonderful. I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I have a bunch of stories, little stories I want to talk about, and some of them are from there. But Tennyson, Idylls of the King, I read it first, probably in middle school, because Jo March in Little Women is weeping, I think, in her attic over with an apple in her hand at the end of Idylls of the King. So it spurred me to pick it up. And it is very beautiful. I mean, it has the knights errant and the stories and the love story. And Arthur is wonderful. It has my favorite Arthur quote in it, actually. At the end, basically, Guinevere becomes a nun. And Arthur's heading off to what he knows to be his final battle. He will not survive it. And she basically asks him, what should I do? And he tells her to pray. And the quote I wrote down, it says, more things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. So a man who can tell his wife who betrayed him and broke his heart that on his way to die seems pretty noble to me.
So good. He is the great king through all of literature. It's what he has become. Whether he was that to begin with, I don't know, but it is certainly what he has become. Like I say, Tennyson's my favorite because I think he brings that out better than anyone else does.
Do you have a favorite piece out of the Idylls? A favorite idol?
I get different things from different ones. So the last tournament is moving. I mean, I do cry at it from time to time. I mean, at the end where Arthur comes across his fool, his jester, who says, I don't have it in front of me, but something to the effect of, Arthur says, who are you and why are you weeping? And he says, I am thy fool, and I will make thee laugh no more because everything is falling. That just crushes me. Yeah. But before that, I love the nobility of it. I love the quests. So the cool thing about Arthur, one of the cool things about Arthur, is that often in the stories, he's not the guy doing stuff. Yeah. But you have to have Arthur for all these other things to happen.
He's the hub.
He's the hub, and then you get to build this world around him, and just knowing that Arthur is in there makes all this stuff meaningful. Among my favorites would also have to be Gawain and the Green Knight. So I just love that story. It's a jewel. It's self-contained. It's connected. It's all together. It's a story from beginning to end, and I've always liked Gawain. So as you read through Arthur, you begin to love his knights and hate some of his knights. Yeah. So each of the knights have their own personality or characteristic. This might be a fun one. I've actually listed out a few of the names of his knights. Okay. And so I'm just curious what, just your gut reaction when I read the name.
Like good guy or bad guy?
Yeah, or a word or like a thing. So if I were to say Lancelot, right, I might say something like awesome. I mean, he's just
complicated.
Great. But complicated. So that idea. So what do you think? You want to go through a couple of these? And if you haven't heard of the knight, that's okay too.
Yeah. There might be some I don't know. Pressure.
Well, I got some of the big ones. So Lancelot, we just said. Gawain.
All good.
Galahad.
Very good.
To the point where he's almost boring.
Yeah, intensely pure.
Tristan.
That's the Tristan and Isolde. So it's very always passion and a love story.
Kay.
Oh, my knowledge of Kay is probably back to the Disney one, which is not his finest. I don't think he's much of a winner.
The Disney is actually pretty characteristic of him. Kay is usually kind of a loser. He's sort of the weak knight.
But not a bad guy.
Not usually bad, but definitely gruff and often petty. And so if you can think of one of Arthur's knights being petty, it's Kay.
Okay.
Pellinor.
Again, back to the Disney one, which may not be the best. I don't know.
Pellinor I associate with the questing beast. So
Okay.
I associate with that hunt.
That I was just picked up the T.H. White book, which is not old. I mean, it's old compared to right now, but it's not a ancient text by any means. It was 1960s maybe? I don't know exactly. But yeah, Pellinor's in there in the forest on his quest. The T.H. White one's it's silly. It's definitely what the Disney movie is based on.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I realized about the T.H. White one, though, is at least so far, the names from A Knight's Tale. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
With Heath Ledger?
Oh,
they
yeah, it's
come
great.
from the T.H. White book.
I did not
There's
know
a
that.
Watt, Sir Ector.
Ector, yeah, that one I got.
But it came from the T.H. White, so I'm assuming I'll hit a Roland at some point. So
Well, Roland actually probably comes from the Song of Roland, which is not Arthurian, but is a similar flavor.
I'm telling you, I think it's in the book too.
We'll look for it.
Because he picked those up. I mean, I don't think he made all of those up, but he pieced them together.
And to be fair, I have not actually read The Once and Future King by T.H. White. I have read a lot. I have not
skipped
read that one.
one.
I did.
Oh, I think I'm 5 chapters in. I mean, I didn't have time to read the whole thing before we talked today. And it's the Disney movie, but with more detail, and it's delightful. So I'd never put it together that wart is somewhat rhyming with art for Arthur. I had no idea. And the wart, he likes falconry, and there's just more details to him, and they're fun. They're lighthearted. He just turned into a fish and back again. So I liked it. Why didn't you like it?
Well, I know people love it, and I'll have to read it because I have no excuse. I cannot defend my lack of having read it. You know what I think it is? I think when I got into reading Arthur seriously, I tended to read him seriously. And so I was reading these other ones that we've talked about, Thomas Mallory and things like that. And honestly, I think I got a little offended for Ector's sake. In most of the traditional tales of Arthur is given to Sir Ector to be raised. Mm-hmm. In The Once and Future King, he's borderline abused by Ector, at least as I understand it, having not read it fully, but only the first few chapters. He's the wart, right? He's sort of the second son who's not Kay.
But they're happy when he gets back.
They are. And so again, I feel I have misjudged this work and need to read
just started,
but I think that was what put me off because I loved Sir Ector, because he took this child in and raised it as his own. And to have him turn kind of into what seemed to me to be a villain, and I'm getting that actually mostly from The Sword and the Stone, the Disney movie. I think that's probably why. Now, having said that, I love The Sword and the Stone, the Disney movie, so I've got no excuse for not having read the book.
It was my favorite Disney movie. It might still be. Archimedes, he's so good.
The highly educated owl.
It is a great movie and no complaints, so I am enjoying the book.
As we talked about earlier, there's really no way to go over all of Arthur, so we're kind of just geeking out about some of the awesomeness of him and the story and the legend.
Absolutely, I got more.
And so go ahead, go into your stuff. I've got a couple other things too.
Well, I said I tried to lump it kind of in consistent things and then one-off things. And so consistent things are things I think most people have heard of. So King of Camelot, married to Guinevere. He always has a special sword. Where it comes from always differs. So you mentioned pulling it from a stone, but then sometimes he gets it from the Lady of the Lake. Where'd she come from? Out of the blue on that one.
Well, a lot of this, I believe, was first canonized in Mallory. So the first sword is not Excalibur. The sword he pulls from the stone is really almost never Excalibur. If you're reading an Arthur tale and they say it is, they probably haven't done their Arthur research. The first sword in most of the versions, he actually breaks when he's doing battle with King Pellinore, who is chasing after the questing beast. So you have King Arthur out in the forest now with a broken sword. So the sword from the stone is no more. He encounters Merlin, and there's various tales of that encounter, but it is then Merlin who takes him to the lake. And this is where he gets on the boat with Merlin and goes over the water, and it is the Lady of the Lake that hands him Excalibur. And again, different versions of this. So in the sword pulled from the stone, right, what's the inscription? Whosoever pulleth out this sword of this stone shall be rightwise king born of England. Whereas the Excalibur that's given to him from the lake has writing on both sides, but in two different languages. So and I'm going to get this mixed up. I can't remember which is which. I think it's in whatever language you speak. On one side, it says, keep me.
That's just cool.
And then on the other side, it's in the oldest language in the world, which Merlin can read, but no one else. It says, throw me away. And so, which is interesting, and you can think about it. And then, of course, with the sword Excalibur comes the scabbard. Do you know that story?
I do not.
So when he is given the sword, Merlin asks him, what do you think about this? What do you like better, the sword or the scabbard? And Arthur, like any knight or young man, would say, well, the sword, obviously. It's awesome. This is clearly the better of the two. And Merlin says, no, it's the scabbard. Because whoever wears that scabbard, no matter how much he is cut, no matter how much he is wounded, he will never lose any blood.
Oh, wow.
And of course, he ends up losing it through treachery later on. But who knows? He might not have taken his death wound if he had been able to keep the scabbard.
I have a quote on Excalibur from the movie Excalibur, time 1981 maybe.
We watched that way too young.
Yeah, and so I haven't watched it since because it was a little traumatizing. But at the time, the quote is good. It says, Excalibur is not my power, but the symbol of my duty. So I do have a lot of stories on swords. I went down an oral, like you mentioned, the Mabinogion. Is that how you say it? We don't know. Mabinogion. But there's so much else to Arthur that's just passed on. People know. And honestly, when we were in Wales, there was this huge sword in the ground. And there's this story about how he slew a giant on the mountain there. I asked where, could I buy that book? And no.
There's no book. We just know it.
There's no book. And so I found an extensive listing of just little stories and verbal oral stories from Arthur. And then I went and asked ChatGPT. I'm like, are these real? And it's like, oh, yeah. So we're going with it. They at least fit the flavor and story of Arthur. And some of them are really cool. I want to tell you about a couple that, again, align with stories I've heard more modern. And I just think they're so cool how they tie together. Not about a sword, but it's at the top. So it's called The Black Dog of Camlin. It's a ghostly supernatural black dog with burning red eyes that appears as an omen of doom. What does that make you think of? Here's my
Hound of the Baskervilles and Harry Potter.
Well, right. Absolutely. Now you got me doing it, man. Absolutely. Hound of the Baskervilles, which is a Sherlock Holmes mystery. That's exactly it, right?
Exactly.
There's also, you'll like this one. It's a story of a sword of light. So,
ooh.
Yeah.
I like it already.
I knew you would. This one is attributed to Excalibur. Some of them aren't, but this one is. So it's not just physical, but also it has the power to protect the land from darkness. So Arthur, to gain it and to wield it, has to confront his inner fears and doubts and find a balance between the light and the dark to retain it. And it made me think of Wheel of Time.
Calendor,
Randall, the Dragon Reborn, and then we're back to the dragon. So there was a bunch of those.
And also, of course, lightsabers.
Yeah, obviously. There's also, I won't go through all of them, but there's the Weeping Sword. So this is separate from Excalibur. That was made from the tears of a weeping fairy queen. Merlin collected them and turned it into a sword. But to carry it, you had to understand what it meant to grieve. And I forget which knight was able to do it, but it was too heavy to bear. So he gave it back. Sword of the Forest has the essence of life and death, and it's even greater magic than Excalibur. That just sounds like a one-up to me. We're like, well, you think Excalibur is good. Check out this one. But there's just tons of them where they just have different twists and turns to them, and they're just all so cool. Some of them, they have the power to heal. So you can kill with it, but you can also heal with it.
Mhm.
That's my little discourse on swords associated with Arthur.
I love that. I love swords too. So as I was thinking about this, these are things that, again, we're not going to talk about today, but I do just want to rattle off a couple terms, some things that go through my head when I'm thinking about Arthur or reading Arthurian tales. Some of these I've said already, some I haven't. So chivalry, the Grail, the custom of the castle. I love that concept. They show up at all these places and there's this weird thing they have to do. Why? Because it's the custom of the castle. The questing beasts, the fair unknown. This shows up all the time where somebody shows up and, they offer to work as a servant or slave, and then it turns out it's, King Arthur's nephew in disguise, and ends up being an incredible thing. The fair unknown. Obviously, magical items and skills, so things like the swords and the scabbard and things like that. The rash boon. You'll see this in Arthur and all sorts of stories once you start looking for it. The idea of somebody promising something before they know what's going to be asked them. People are always showing up at Arthur's court saying, will you grant me this request?
Yeah,
and he
promise
says,
me
yes.
You'll do this. Yeah.
And then it ends up being something terrible, but he still has to do it because the rash boon was granted. The Fisher King is something that I hope we get to talk in detail in at some point. And then the last one is one that...
You got to give a little bit. Give the 10-second version of the Fisher King.
The Fisher King is the king of the Grail Castle, a wounded king whose health is tied to the health of the land. Mm-hmm. And it's wonderful. The Siege Perilous. I didn't know for the longest time. That meant a seat. So the dangerous seat.
I did not know that.
This one is often told where around the round table, there is one seat that no one could sit in. So all the seats by Merlin's art would have the name of the knight in gold around it. And so you knew where you're supposed to sit because your name was there. Mm-hmm. But the Siege Perilous had no name. And anyone who sat in that wasn't the knight it was for dies. Because that's just what happens. And of course, it's Galahad, right? I mean, sure. Who else could sit in the Siege Perilous? But the idea of this seat that was reserved for a special hero is cool to me. And then the last thing is just going back to the concept of fairyland. There's a phrase that I love, and I probably read it somewhere, but I can't remember where. Arthur rules on the borders of fairyland. Because in all his stories, a knight hops on a horse, rides for an hour, and all of a sudden they're at another castle. They're at another enchanted well, another river, another something. Because time, space, motion, it doesn't work the same in fairyland. And so you have Arthur the King, who is king of Britain, but also a ruler in fairyland. And it just opens up the world for what you can explore and what you can experience.
Well, that takes me to my dragon stories.
Oh, please.
There are many dragon stories associated with Arthur, and they are delightful. This one took me straight to a movie. I feel like they based it exactly off that. It's called The Dragon's Pact with Merlin. So it's about how the dragons were once protectors, and they would grant their knowledge and power to a few wizards, druids, to keep the balance between nature and magic. But the dragon's bloodline in this story must be sacrificed for the dragon's blessing to fall on Arthur and unite the kingdom. So the dragon has to die for the peace to rule, which took me clearly to Dragonheart.
Yes.
Dennis Quaid and Sean Connery.
I won't even apologize. I enjoy it.
It is cheesy and great.
Yes.
And it is.
He's a knight of the old code.
Knight of the old code. You've probably heard this one, the Dragon of Tintagel. So it's the dragon that lives under Camelot, in a cave under Camelot, and he emerged. This one says when the people became too proud. And so he emerged to restore balance and test the strength and honor of Arthur's kingdom. The test wasn't he didn't just decimate Camelot. It was a test of strength and wits, which took me to Bilbo and Smaug and the Hobbits. There's at least 15 dragon stories that I just pulled out. There's a couple that Arthur physically battles with a sword and, smote his ruin upon the mountainside. But most of them, because there are monster stories and those as well, and those he does battle physically with a sword. Dragons, Merlin basically tells them they are intelligent creatures and you can't just fight them. And they have power to manipulate the weather and they have magic of their own. But in almost all these stories, it's a test of wisdom and wit And sometimes they observe his doings. So he went and helped the city. And then the dragon is convinced that he truly is courageous and pure. And so he gives him the artifact or tells him about the grail. And almost all of them disappear because Arthur's that good that they are just convinced to disappear into the mist, or some are frozen in the ice. Some go to the underworld. But this is my theory as to why there's a shortage of dragons. Arthur got rid of them all. He sent them all away. That's how good he was. This one's called the Dragon of the Castle of the Silver Sword. And that's the heal or destroy sword. So anyway, I got really excited about all of these different types of stories, and they overlap, but they're all individual and they're awesome. And Arthur's awesome.
And I am so excited. There's so many Arthur stories that I don't know that I get to experience
These
now.
are the little ones. They weren't long and they're not written down. I just found little blips of them, and we tried to sort them into category. And we have way more I don't think we can cover today on standing stones and magical people and castles, and we've barely touched on Merlin.
Oh, yeah. We've barely talked about Modred. We haven't even mentioned Morgan Le Fay.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned King Lot of Orkney. There's so much.
Or the knights, really. Because they all have their own quests, and they're all. And
we
so
haven't mentioned
Avalon.
Yvain, the Knight of the Lion, who's one of my favorites. There's so many.
Well, and Avalon.
And Avalon.
What is Avalon? Where is Avalon?
Avalon is the Isle of the Apples, is the way it's often described. It's fairyland. It's the mythical place where Arthur goes to heal after he is mortally wounded. Now, there's debate about whether it's mythical or not. So those cheeky monks in Glastonbury many, many years ago said that they are Avalon. So there's a whole thing where back in the day, they dug up what was supposed to be this giant man and the woman next to him, and there was a cross that said basically, here lies Arthur and his second wife, Guinevere. The argument went that at the time that Arthur was around, Glastonbury, which is now, an abbey, I think, it was an island. So there was actually a water there that you had to go across to get there. There are those who believe that Glastonbury is Avalon, but I think to most of us, it is fairyland. It is the place where Arthur goes to heal, and hopefully he will come back again someday.
Yeah, there are stories about the knights gaining entrance by different ways. It actually has a little bit of homage to the...
I was going to say, one of the main sources on Arthur we have not yet mentioned is Monty Python's Search for the Holy Grail.
Python, where they have to answer the questions to gain access to Avalon. And
So
it did
good.
make me think of the Kniggets. It was hilarious. Avalon's a little more serious than that, but I read a story that said he's asleep in a lake there. There's a lot of symbolism, I think, with water throughout the Arthur stories. But Avalon, because Arthur is mortally wounded in the battle, and he is taken to rest until he is needed again. It reminded me again of Tolkien, because many things do. When elves are killed, they go to the halls of Mandos.
Correct.
In Valinor. And it definitely a parallel there for me. The fact that we still remember Arthur and so much about him, and it's just developed and continuing to develop, it made me realize he kind of is immortal. Maybe he found the Grail, and this is what his immortality looks like. And it took me to Abraham in the Bible, where he's like, I will make your name great for generations. And everybody's at least heard of Abraham. Everybody's at least heard of Arthur. So in that way, he's been immortalized. And I just think that's amazing.
So going back to the texts and the old books, there was one version of Arthur that we haven't really talked about that's called the alliterative Morte Arthur. It was a middle-aged piece, and it's long. Problem with it, or the reason I don't actually like it very much, is that Arthur actually becomes a villain in this one. There's actually several versions of the story where Arthur becomes a tyrant later in his rule and then has to be overthrown. Again, it speaks to the breadth of the story and the ways they can take it, but there's a handwritten note at the bottom of it. And I had thought I had made this up for a little bit, but then I rewatched that Great Courses class and I confirmed that this was actually the case. Handwritten at the end of that book is the Latin phrase, Rex quondam, rexque futurus. The king who once was, and the king who shall be.
The once and future king.
The once and future king. Well, thank you for joining us in this brief exploration into the world of Arthur. We will spend more time there, and in the future, I look forward to sharing stories with that. But for today, let's go ahead and turn the page, and we hope that you join us for the next chapter.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're willing, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating and follow the Good Stories Podcast Facebook page. It only takes a moment and helps the algorithm wizardry that lets other people learn about our podcast. Thank you.